This online video series shows easy step-by-step ways to make great tasting meals, side dishes, and snacks to help you clean up your diet by eliminating processed foods, refined sugar, grains, and dairy from your diet. Sit back, take notes, and then go make something paleo.
Welcome to another episode of Bill and Staci's Paleo Kitchen. I'm Bill Russell, and I promise you there is a Staci to go along with this series. She'll be in an episode coming up soon. Today I'm going to go over the steps for making my beef jerky. I'm going to show you first how I prep the meat, and then I'm going to make a marinade, let that meat sit at least 4 hours, preferably overnight. I'm going to lay that out on trays in a food dehydrator, sprinkle seasonings and spices on the meat then, and then put it away for a few hours, and you're going to have a great batch of homemade beef jerky with all natural ingredients and none of the chemicals that come along with that packaged stuff. I'm going to start with a piece of London broil. This is just about 2 pounds. It's a little bit less. Cost me $6.99 a pound at Earth Fare. I've used sirloin steak in the past. That's my favorite. We can get it at Costco for a little bit under $5 a pound. It's a more tender cut of beef. To make the meat easier to cut, I'll freeze it for about 3 hours, so it's just about half frozen. This, you can see it's a little bit stiff, but it's not completely frozen. That makes it a lot easier to slice it thin. So what I'm going to do first is cut the pieces pretty thin. I'm going to cut across the grain, and I like to cut them about between 1/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch thick. Now I'm going to show you in a minute how I use a meat tenderizer hammer to thin this out a little bit, and it's mainly to keep the pieces uniform or consistent. So you don't have to be really careful about the thickness. Just if you cut it too thick, you're going to be making yourself a lot more work in a few minutes. If you do have any big chunks of visible fat, I'd suggest that you trim that off. Now this is a really nice cut of beef, and I'm not going to have a lot of waste, but you might find that you get a piece that has some corners that you can't make a real nice thin slice, so that's alright. Just make small cubes, and I'll show you how to flatten those out. So this meat is still partially frozen, so I need to let it thaw completely before I pound it out with a hammer. So I'm going to take this time now, show you how I make the marinade. So I'm going to start out 1/4 cup of wine and 1/4 cup of red wine vinegar. And then I'm going to use coconut aminos. It's our soy sauce substitute. If you like soy sauce, this is a good time to put it in. This is a soy-free alternative. So I'm going to take 2 tablespoons and add it to that mix. Adds just a little bit of flavor. And then our old standby, I'm going to put garlic powder in here. If you've got the time, if you want to take fresh garlic and a garlic press and put in fresh garlic, that's great. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper and a little bit of kosher salt. And that's my marinade. I'm really not trying to soak the meat too much. It's not a marinade for flavor. The marinade is really there to tenderize this cut of meat. So when your meat is completely thawed, now you're going to take a meat tenderizer hammer and thin these slices out. What I'm after is a consistent thickness. It takes quite a while for a thick piece of this meat to cook, and the easiest way to get a consistent thickness is to use the bumpy edges of this hammer. And I'm just going to go along and thin it out. And so if I use about the same amount of pressure when I pound each piece, they're all going to come out about that thick. And so when they cook, they'll cook evenly. And I want you to experiment with different thicknesses. You might like it a little thicker and a little chewier. You make this real thin and it comes out almost like bacon. So I recommend that you experiment with a lot of things in this batch. Not only the thickness of the meat, but when we get to the seasoning part, how much seasoning, which seasonings you put on, and figure out the best combination for you. So as I pound this out, I'm going to take it in the bowl, and I don't just drop all the meat in the liquid because it soaks it up pretty quick. I just slop it through, and then I let it drain on the side of this bowl so the excess goes to the bottom, so that marinade goes a long way. I talked about the chunk pieces before. Don't waste those. Take that, and you can just pound it out. You got to pound it a little bit harder when it's thick. It only takes 10 or 15 seconds, and that piece comes out just like the others. You'll see I'll make a big mess by the time I'm done, especially when I get to the seasoning, so I better get this cleaned up before Staci gets home or she's going to kill me. Alright, so you get the idea. I'm going to take all this meat that I've sliced up and pound it out. That piece was a little thicker, so it's more work for me to get it thin. So, when you're slicing it, slice it as thin as you can, because you'll save yourself time and a lot of noise during this step. Alright, so that half a cup or so of marinade was plenty for this 2 pounds of meat. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay the pieces out in another container. It's going to make it easier for me when I lay the pieces out on the food dehydrator trays. So right now I'm just going to take the pieces out and fill this container. One of the objectives of this video series is to give you some of the tips on what not to do, just to save you time and make it easier in the kitchen. And laying out these strips like I'm doing is a huge time saver when I go to load up the trays. I'm going to take this container, cover it, and I'm going to refrigerate it for at least 4 hours. What I normally do when I make the jerky is I'll prepare this in the evening. I'll let this set overnight in the fridge, and then in the morning I'll load up the trays, and 3 or 4 hours later I've got a whole batch of beef jerky. We're back and ready to put the beef jerky strips out on the dehydrator trays. So I'm going to take a colander, I got a drip tray underneath it, and I'm going to drop the meat in here and let all that extra juice and liquid drip off. So that'll keep the cooking time to a minimum. So I use a Nesco food dehydrator. It's the same one that we used in our kale chip episode, if you watched that. It's a Nesco model. You can get it at Bed Bath & Beyond. I think the unit was $60. Staci had one of those 20% off coupons that they send in the mail, so for $48 plus tax, we got a 4-tray food dehydrator. They sell a package, 2 extra trays for $10. I strongly recommend that you get that while you're there. You're going to see that we'll fill this up completely today. So, to get started, I'm going to take all the meat and stack on the trays, and then go through and put the seasoning on. I want to have enough room between each slice so that air can flow and they'll dry nice. So our friends Heather and Jeff Shimo say they make jerky quite often at home, but Jeff told me that he doesn't have a food dehydrator. He just cooks them in the oven. He puts them on little baking trays. I think something like this. You can get them at the dollar store for the 2 for $1. They work really nicely. You can lay them out, and it gives the air a chance to get underneath the meat. But once you try making something like this in a food dehydrator, you'll not go back to the oven. It's just too hard to get the temperature right, and you've got to turn the beef jerky, and you can't overcook. With this food dehydrator, it's really hard to do anything wrong. If you cook them a little bit too long, they just crispen up like bacon, and I still haven't met a person that doesn't like bacon, so that's not a bad thing. So I'm going to put all this out and then put the seasoning on one tray at a time. And what I recommend that you do is experiment with different seasonings, and you'll find the combination that you like the best. So I usually do something different on every tray, and then when I'm done, I'll put it all in a bag, one big bag. And so now I've got a variety so that I don't get bored with the same taste through the week. Now when you put the seasoning on, it's real easy to tell which tray has what, but once it cooks, it all looks the same. So you may want to write down a piece of paper what seasoning you put on each tray, and then put the jerky in separate bags and take that piece of paper and put the label inside, and then you can figure out what you like the best, and then you'll have your favorite beef jerky recipe. So now comes another messy part. There's really no way around it, so just deal with it. Let's start with the bottom tray, and my favorite is I like to put a little cumin. Just sprinkle it on, and you don't need to go too strong. It's part of the experimenting. You're going to see one batch you're going to make and you put too much on it, and you'll learn. Just a little bit goes a long way for flavor. So I like cumin and some kind of Cajun seasoning. To date, this is my favorite combination. My second favorite, if you like a smoky flavor, at Trader Joe's they have this spice called South African smoke. I'm sorry. It's just a couple bucks for this big grinder, and it's a really strong smoke flavor. It's really good on fish and steak and chicken. And all the ingredients are natural and paleo. And on the last, I'm going to try another new combination. I've got ground ginger picked up at Earth Fare. I put this on some grilled chicken the other day and it was really good. So a little bit of ground ginger and cumin. Let's talk a little bit about the cost and the calories in this beef jerky. This meat cost about $15. It was just shy of 2 pounds, about 30 ounces, and it's going to yield me 10 ounces worth of beef jerky. It's usually a 3-to-1 cook down when I cook beef. Remember that when you do the calorie count. In 3 ounces of beef, you've got roughly 150 to 180 calories. You probably got about 4, 5, 6 grams of saturated fat. Depends on the cut of the beef. So now that's cooked down to 1 ounce. So in every ounce of beef jerky, you've got that much. You've got about 150, 160, 170 calories and 5 or 6 grams of fat. We used all natural ingredients, no preservatives in this batch, so that means I'm going to have to keep it refrigerated. I don't mind leaving it out for a little while. If I go for a weekend and I've got it in a plastic bag sealed up, I'll leave it out. But anything longer than that, I'm going to want to put it in the refrigerator. I'm going to set the food dehydrator at 160 degrees, and I'm going to check back in about an hour and a half and see how things are going. The batch isn't going to be quite done yet, but then I'll start looking every 15 or 20 minutes to see when it's done. Depending on how thick the meat is and how much marinade is still on the meat when you put it on the trays is going to greatly determine how long it takes to finish. Rarely has it taken over 4 hours to cook a batch, and that's usually when I have it pounded it so thin. So you cook it for as long as you want and get the consistency that you like. You'll know when it's done if you pick up the piece of jerky, and as you bend it, it'll start to tear a little bit at the outside of the meat. If you can bend it like rubber, then it's not done yet. You need to put it in for at least another half an hour. Keep an eye on it and you'll find the texture that you like. Thanks for watching this episode of Bill and Staci's Paleo Kitchen. I hope you learned something, and I hope you're going to go make a batch of your own beef jerky soon. Please feel free to send any questions or comments to paleo@crossfitcleveland.com. We'll respond to every email that we get, and if you have suggestions for future videos, please include them there. Thanks again and have a great day.